So can we talk about myth and religion a little bit? So
Yes.
I mean, can we start at the beginning, which is like myths? How are they born? There's this collective intelligence amongst us human beings, and we seem to create these beautiful ideas that captivate the minds of millions. How is such a myth born?
Great question. Okay, so that brings us to terminology again. In in my field, we definitely, I think, try not to distinguish between religion. This is going to be controversial, I think,
Uh-oh.
between religion and myth, because we call other cultures religions myths, right? And then we call our myths religions.
And I guess myth has a bad connotation to it, that it's
It's
not
not
somehow
true.
real,
Yeah.
right?
Now, what's interesting is that people like Plato, who lived thousands of years ago, 2,500 about, basically made this distinction himself within his own culture, which was Greek, right? So Plato's a very famous Greek philosopher. And he would say things like this. He would say that um, he would make a distinction between the reality of the one God, or the one. He would call it, he didn't use the word God, but he's referencing a divinity of, okay, and he believes in the soul. Okay. So, but he would also say that the gods and goddesses of the Greeks are just myths.
Mhm.
So even he would make that distinction again. He would say the population is not too bright, so they believe in these gods and goddesses. But he himself is talking to his students, and he's basically talking about forms. That seem to live in these other dimensions. Like this table. Let's go back to this table that we're talking around right now. He would say that this table is the instantiation of the form table, and that there's this table that actually exists somewhere. It's where this place where numbers exist, like
Yeah.
the number 2. Okay, so we use the number 2 mathematically, therefore it exists. But have you ever seen a real one? Have you ever seen the real 2? No.
No.
Okay, so but where does it exist? So he says that tables. So he was also talking about things that, you know, he says are real, making a distinction between the people. And by the way, he got this from Socrates, his mentor, who was killed by Athens because he would say such things. People don't like to be told that what they believe in is not real, right?
Yeah. By the way, his idea of forms is just, you're just making me realize how like incredible was that somebody like that was able to come up with that. I mean, that idea became a myth. The idea of forms, right? That permeated probably the most influential set of ideas in the history of philosophy, in the history of ideas.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Plato, we know him for a reason, right?
Yeah. So let's say that we're not. It's a gray area between religious and myths, and maybe not even.
It is gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what? How's that idea with like little Plato start and permeate through all of
Okay.
society?
How does that happen? Okay, so there are different ways that religions work. So a lot of people would call the UFO narrative today like and this is what I talk about in my book, like a myth, right? The UFO myth. But a lot of people believe in it. Okay, so how do these things work? Well, what I did was I took there's a Ann Taves at UC Santa Barbara. She's a pretty well-known academic who studies religion, and she has this building block definition of religion, like it builds. Okay, and so she says there are no religious experiences or mythic experiences. There are experiences, and then they get interpreted as religious or mythic. Okay, and so I use that with the UFO narrative. So I take and I compare it to the religious narrative. So basically, what happens? What happens is this: is that a person generally has a very intense experience. It could be with something that they see in the sky, a being, that they see, like Moses in the burning bush or something like that. They tell other people, okay, and those other people believe them because they say, that guy, let's take you. Okay, Lex. Okay, so you're playing, some of your music. Jimi Hendrix
Yeah.
shows up out of the blue. So Jimi Hendrix, who does electric church stuff, right? The electric church movement. So he shows up.
I was sorry for a small tangent. I'm not aware of. I apologize if I should be. I'm just know how to play all of the songs. Electric Church. Is this a
Oh
thing?
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know this
It's
was a
Jimi
thing.
Hendrix's thing. Yeah. So
That was like a philosophy of his, or what? What is?
yes. So he
Oh,
thought
wow.
it was like a mission for him, like he was a missionary, and he was like doing the electric church. It was through his mission of music that he was actually impacting people spiritually. And I think you have to agree that his
Oh, that
music
is
is really
interesting.
spiritual. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool to know that there's like a philosophy there. I
Yeah.
wonder if he's ever written anything.
He's spoken about it many times.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
need to actually do some research here. Wow, that adds another level of depth. That's awesome. Okay, so
Okay, so say Lex is playing
yeah, Hendrix.
one of his songs.
Yeah.
He shows up.
What's your favorite Hendrix song, by the way?
Oh, that's a hard one. I like Castles in the Sand. It's a sad one, but
Yeah.
I like it.
So I'm playing something, and
Yes.
I show up.
And all of a sudden, boom, just like Elvis does for people,
Yeah.
Hendrix shows up. All right. And then you're amazed. And then he tells you something that's very, very significant. And he says, you need to tell other people this. Okay. So then, like, okay.
I go on social media.
Yes. And you start, and because people believe you, and because you are a person of, credibility, people believe you. And so all of a sudden a movement starts. Okay. And it's the Hendrix movement. It's Hendrix 2 or something like that. We call it something, the next iteration of Hendrix, right? Hendrix lives, but he lives as this vibration, and only Lex can can manifest this vibration. Okay. So like, this is how religions start. Excuse your audience who are religious. I'm actually a practicing Catholic. So this is how religions start. They start with, first off, a contact experience. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. Some person has an experience that's transcendent, sacred to them. And they go and they tell other people. And then those people tell other people. And then something gets written about it. Okay. And then it becomes, because it's a charismatic movement, people become affected by it. And if too many people are affected by it, an institution steps in and tries to control the narrative. So this is what you'd call the beginning of a religion or a myth, a very powerful myth. And so it's almost like a star, right? A star is born.
A star is born.
Yeah.
When you say institution, do you mean some other organization that's already powerful doesn't want to become overpowered by this new movement?
Yes, absolutely.
Is this usually governments?
It's usually, yeah. So I have a couple examples. I use the example of the Christian church in my book because I'm most familiar with the history of Christianity. And, Christianity was started by this Jewish man, and it was a movement that, he was a very powerful, charismatic person. Other people believed in him, and then his followers talked about him. And then usually early Christians before the 300s were generally people who were disenfranchised, because he had a pretty radical idea that, humans should have dignity. And this was pretty radical during that time. So women who didn't have dignity and, slaves who didn't have dignity at the time, converted to Christianity in droves. And so what happened was that all of a sudden, it became this belief system that was undercurrent. And then Constantine, who was an elite, had an experience and made Christianity a state religion. By that time, there were different forms of Christianity, probably hundreds of them, well, most likely. And Constantine and the people who were powerful with him decided that their idea, this is the Council of Nicaea now, decided that there was one form, and they called it universal, the one form of Christianity, and this should be it. And so they kind of took out all the other denominations of Christianity and different forms of it. So you can see that a very, very powerful set of beliefs put a culture on fire, right? Mm. And so how did they had to deal with that fire somehow. And so they narrativized it. They decided, how do we interpret this? And they interpreted it as they wished, but that wasn't the only interpretation of Christianity. I have another example. In the Catholic Church, a lot of times, and I'm going to use the example of Faustina. She's a nun, and she's Polish. And I think it was in the early 20th century, if not the 1800s, that she had a very powerful many experiences actually of Jesus, and she saw Jesus with rays coming out of his heart, and basically she called this his divine mercy, and it became a devotion in Poland, and it spread. The Catholic Church was not into this at all, okay, and so they did everything they could to try to suppress Faustina's influence, which was growing and growing and growing and growing. Okay. And so they were very successful in trying to keep her quiet. And she died. Okay. Years later, John Paul II, Polish, sainted her and created the Divine Mercy devotion, which is worldwide now, and millions of people. But do you see how they completely controlled it?
So fascinating that it just starts with a single, so like you said, contact experience.
Yes.
Experience is the key word. And is your sense that those experiences are legitimate? So it's not
yes, for the
somehow
most part,
artificially constructed?
Yeah, I think for the most part, they're legitimate experiences that people have. Why would someone want to put themselves through what they go through? Like, why would Jesus want to get crucified? I mean, that's a pretty nasty way to die. Why would Faustina bring this upon herself? The people that I meet who've said that they've seen UFOs, that most of them don't want to be known because of the ridicule that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. So I honestly think that, there are people who are maybe not stable and would like the attention, but for the most part, normal people don't want this attention.